high context culture versus low context culture, communication design for avoiding uncertainty. Whether it's a face to face conversation, connecting over a Zoom call, or interacting via Slack or email, if we wish to communicate effectively, we need to understand how culture affects communication. Cultural diversity, if not handled well, can be a source of inefficiency, confusion, frustration, anxiety, and stress at work. When we don't appreciate the cultural differences in how others convey and interpret information, we are more likely to misunderstand them. What happens when people from other countries and cultures don't behave according to our cultural norms? We attribute their behavior to their personality. It's who they are. We also find it convenient to go with cultural stereotypes without making an attempt to understand how culture plays a role in their style of communication. Erin Meyer, professor in organizational behavior and specialist on cross cultural management, says subtle differences in communication patterns and the complex variations in what is considered good business or common sense from one country to another have a tremendous impact on how we understand one another and ultimately on how we get the job done. By sidestepping common stereotypes and learning to decode the behavior of other cultures, we can avoid giving and taking offense and better capitalize on the strengths of increased diversity. By understanding the difference in expectations when people from high context and low context cultures communicate, we can take steps to reduce this communication gap. High context culture requires reading between the lines. Low context culture requires stating as you mean it. In a high context culture, communication is indirect, implicit, subtle, layered, and nuanced. In a low context culture, communication is concise, straightforward, explicit, simple, and clear. In a high context culture, nonverbal cues like tone of voice, eye movements, gestures, and facial expressions carry a great deal of meaning. Low context culture requires attention to the literal meanings of words rather than to the context surrounding them. In a high context culture, the true intent of the message is not communicated verbally and is often left to the interpretation of the individual, which requires contextual understanding and reading between the lines. In other words, verbal messages are indirect, often talking around the point, and require shared cultural context to carry meaning. In a low context culture, with emphasis on sending and receiving accurate messages, nothing is left to interpretation, and actual intent is conveyed in words. Repetition is often used to provide the necessary clarity. High context cultures focus on long term relationships to derive meaning, which makes explicitness unnecessary. In a low context culture, the purpose and outcome of the communication takes precedence over interpersonal relationships. Focus on following standards and procedures leads to short term relationships. This requires that more value be placed on logic, facts, and directness of the message. During meetings, high context cultures do not summarize the key takeaways or follow it up with written communication with the implicit assumption that everyone got their part right. In a low context culture, summarizing the key takeaways from the meeting and nailing things down in writing are expected to avoid confusion and set clear expectations. Individuals who value high context communication find low context style of communication as extremely detailed, distrustful, and a waste of time due to repetition of message. Individuals who value low context communication find high context communicators as lazy, undisciplined, secretive, lacking transparency, unable to communicate effectively, or those who waste a lot of time in trying to build relationships as opposed to getting the work done. Erin Meyer developed an 8-scale model that shows how cultures vary along a spectrum from one extreme to the other. Let's map communication across cultures on this scale. The United States is the lowest context culture in the world, followed by Canada, Australia, Netherlands, Germany, and the United Kingdom. All Anglo-Saxon cultures fall on the left-hand side of the scale, with the United Kingdom as the highest context culture of the Anglo-Saxon cluster. All the countries that speak Romance languages, including European countries like Italy, Spain, and France, and Latin American countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, fall to the middle right of the scale. Brazil is the lowest context culture in this cluster. Many African and Asian countries fall even further right, with Japan as the highest context culture in the world. When examining how people from different cultures relate to one another, what matters is not the absolute position of either culture on the scale, but rather the relative position of the two cultures. It is this relative positioning that determines how people view one another. This is an important aspect when comparing communication styles across cultures. To communicate effectively with people from high context and low context cultures, follow these four strategies. Number one, identify your style. Before implementing effective communication practices across cultures, identify your own style. You use high context communication if you rely on both verbal and non-verbal cues, often implicitly stating what you intend and expect others to derive meaning from the context. In short, you expect others to read between the lines. You are a low context communicator if you're direct, explicitly state what you expect without having to interpret what you intend to say. In short, you say what you mean. Number two, working with people from high context culture. If you are from a low context culture and working with someone from a high context culture, don't rely on making literal sense of words and try to interpret what's behind the message. To do this, listen carefully, observe their body language, reflect on their intent, and ask questions to get to the underlying message. Watch out for these phrases as a sign to extract more information. I will think about it. I guess so. I will do my best. It will be very difficult, but I'm going to give it a try. When it's your turn to pass on a message to someone from a high context culture, use less repetition and engage with them to understand if your message has been received well. Number three, working with people from low context culture. If you are from a high context culture and working with someone from a low context culture, focus on the content of the message without looking for hidden meaning. Don't hesitate to ask clarifying questions if the intent is not clear or the message sounds confusing. People from low context culture will appreciate your directness to seek clarity as opposed to keeping quiet and learning about the gap in understanding later. While sending a message to someone from a low context culture, be clear and explicit. Convey the main idea first and don't wait till the end to state what you actually intend to convey. Beating around the bush without getting to the point is sure to lose their attention and cause confusion. It's also a good idea to summarize the key takeaways verbally as well as in writing. Number four, agree on a communication framework. When working with people across cultures, sometimes what works best is for the team to develop their own language for communication. By being part of the shared context, understanding the cultural differences, and misunderstanding that can arise due to these differences, the team will be better equipped to appreciate these differences and devise a strategy that benefits everyone. Another advantage for creating a communication framework is to explicitly seek an agreement from all members of the team and hold each other accountable to adhere to it. Consider these examples of communication differences across cultures. Number one, Crest toothpaste advertisements. Two different advertisements catering to different context cultures were analyzed with the English Teaching Institute in Beijing. The first advertisement said, "Now there is something more dentists can recommend for your gums that's proven to help them get healthier. Crest Plus Gum is the only cavity-fighting toothpaste that's so effective and is clinically proven to help preserve the gum disease gingivitis." Just what the dentists ordered. This advertisement, meant for people within low context cultures, is direct and informative. The information about cavity protection, clinical studies, and dentist recommendations is all in the three sentences. People within low context cultures, because they tend to enjoy direct communication, will find this advertisement helpful. The second advertisement said, "Behind that healthy smile, there is a Crest kid." The second advertisement, meant for high context cultures, is less directly informative. Because information is implied, the advertisement appeals to people within high context cultures. Number two, I heard him right. This example is taken from Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map. This example demonstrates the communication gap due to cultural differences between Pablo Diaz, a Spanish executive who worked in China for a textile company, and Chen, another employee of that company. This is how the discussion went. Diaz to Chen, It looks like some of us are going to have to be here on Sunday to host the client visit. Chen to Diaz, I see. Diaz to Chen, can you join us on Sunday? Chen to Diaz, yes, I think so. Diaz to Chen, that would be a great help. Chen to Diaz, yes, Sunday is an important day. Diaz to Chen, in what way? Chen to Diaz, it's my daughter's birthday. Diaz to Chen, how nice. I hope you all enjoy it. Chen to Diaz, thank you. I appreciate your understanding. Once the conversation ended, Diaz was quite certain that Chen had said he was coming. And Chen was quite certain he had communicated that he absolutely could not come because he was going to be celebrating his daughter's birthday with his family. Diaz learned from this experience that if he's not 100% sure what he heard, shrugging his shoulders and leaving the message that he sort of thinks he heard is not a good strategy. If I'm not sure, I have to take the responsibility to ask for clarification. Sometimes I have to ask 3 or 4 times, and although that can be a little embarrassing for both me and my colleague, it's not as embarrassing as having a production line set and ready and waiting for Mr. Chen, who's contentedly singing happy birthday somewhere else.